Obvious texture tiling is a headache for every CG artist. Hi, I'm Bill Barber, and in this video we're going to look at how to blend polygon materials to both combat tiling and to combine multiple materials together, in this case to make a realistic ground material. Before we get started, let's take a look at the materials we'll be using. It'll be this one, Ground Forest 005, and I'll also be making use of Rock Mossy Fall 007. Another file you'll want to download is the Specular Workflow Mixer node group. There's a link to that below the video. Okay, let's head over to Blender. Okay, so this is the scene that we'll be working on today. It's just a simple ground plane with a little bit of shape to it, just so we're not working on a completely flat plane. And that is really about it. I've already optimized the render settings and whatnot. That's a bit outside of the scope of this material, so we'll just ignore those. One thing I have done is use the Poliigon material converter to load in the two materials already, so they're available for us to grab textures from, but we'll be working on this new material which I've just called Ground Master. Now, two things to note. One, you're going to want to go to User Preferences, go to Add-ons, and if you haven't already done it, enable Node Wrangler, which is a very, very useful add-on that comes free with Blender. And the other thing you're going to want to do is download the Specular Mixer, which I mentioned a moment ago, and then once you've downloaded it, go to File, go to Append, find the file in question, Specular Mixer, and then go to Node Tree and bring in this node group, Poliigon Specular Mixer. We'll take a look at that in a moment, but I just wanted to make sure that everything's in and good to go. Now, as you can see, I've already set up a camera, so what I'm going to do now is press numpad 0 and jump to camera view. Then let's head over to the Ground Forest material for a moment. And what I want to do is first rearrange that a little bit. I think a recent update in Blender has made the nodes wider for some reason, but anyway. And I'm just going to press B and then draw a box around everything left of the principled shader, and we're going to basically take all this with us. So now I've got that selected, I'm going to press Ctrl C to copy it, head over to the ground material, or the master material, and press Ctrl V. So we've brought all those nodes in. Now, because I'm going to be mixing materials together, we need to do a little bit of work here. First of all, I want to grab this and just make a little bit of room, and then everything other than this ambient occlusion node I want to drag over here, because this will still be attached to our shader and will be our kind of final nodes before the principled shader, even when we've mixed in more materials. What I am going to do is delete this bump node because we don't need it, and I'm going to drag the displacement texture to the bottom just so it's easy to access. Then what we'll do is connect up the color, connect up the specular and the roughness and the normal map, and then we should have a normal material good to go. Let's just test it by going into rendered mode, and yeah, it's working good. What we are going to need to do though is adjust the scaling, and this is where the tiling problem will come into play. So you'll notice here the scaling on this particular material isn't 1:1:1, it's 1:1 and 0.5, and that's simply because this is a rectangular texture rather than a square one. It's a 2:1 aspect ratio. So on most materials this will just say 1:1, but in this case we need to increase the tiling. I'm going to go for about 12, which would make this 6. Yeah, and that's working fine. Problem is, we've already got very, very, very obvious tiling, especially if I jump out of camera mode for a second, you'll see the very, very obvious tiling. And that's the whole point of this video, is ways to combat that. What we'll do now is press Shift A, go down to the group, and then bring in the Poliigon Specular Mixer. Now, it's actually a very simple shader. I'll just tab into it for a moment so we can take a look at what it's doing. It's literally just a bunch of mixed nodes combining the different textures of a PBR material with another one. But all of them are controlled by the one factor. You can see how that one factor is feeding all of these, and it just makes it nice and easy. So if for any reason you didn't want to download this, it's quite easy to make yourself. Anyway, let's get on with this and start by feeding in the various channels of this material. the ambient occlusion just gets multiplied, or the colour, I should say, gets multiplied by the ambient occlusion. That just counts as a single colour channel, at least as far as we're concerned, which is why I left that node on this side of things. So let's connect up the rest, like so, and I'll plug in displacement as well. And then what we want to do at this point is feed this instead into the principled shader. But what I'm going to do, just so it's easier to keep an eye on as we adjust things, is hold shift and draw a little line through these various bits so we can just connect them to there. So the reflection, gloss, and then the normal map. Good. So that's connected. And if I drag this down so we can see the rendered view, it looks exactly the same because I've currently got the mix factor on 0. If I were to set it to 1, all the textures are white, and our material disappears. Good. So, to combat detiling, what we're going to do is actually create a copy of this material, which I'll do now. Control C and then Control V, and then press grab, and done. But what we'll do on this one is completely change the rotation and adjust the scale and position a little bit. So first of all, let's connect this up to our mix shader, like so. Now you'll notice the displacement isn't actually going anywhere currently, but we will get to that in a moment. Okay, so now if I change the mix value all the way up, it's going to be using this bottom set of textures rather than the top. And I just want to make sure that's in the right place. It is. Good. Okay, so for this one, we're going to rotate it along the z-axis by 90. So that's rotated it 90 degrees, but because it's a rectangular texture, it's now looking stretched because we have to reverse what we're doing here. So instead this should be 1266, and you'll see now it looks fine. But I want to slightly adjust the scaling to assist with this detailing, so I'm going to change it to 1055 instead, like so. And I'm also going to adjust the X amount, probably just by 1 meter or so, and the Y as well, just so everything's in a slightly different place. Good. And now if we adjust this value, you'll see the two different instances of the texture. Now there's tiling on both. If I jump out of camera mode, we've got tiling there, we've got tiling there, but most importantly, different types of tiling. So what we can now do is use a noise texture to blend these two together. So if I press Shift A, go to texture and then noise texture, like so, and then hit Control, Shift and left click. This is where Node Wrangler comes in handy because it will just instantly allow us to preview the noise texture. I'll do it once more, so we're just looking at the black and white one. And what I'll do is feed in the object coordinates rather than the generated. There we go. Now we're going to change to a value of about 0.3 and also add in a color ramp, because if we were to just plug this straight into the mix factor, we'd have a very gradual change between the two, but we want it to be more harsh, so we're not distorting the texture too much. So I don't want that. Converter, color ramp, that's the one. And then if you just change the values here from, say, let's click on the black value and change that to about 0.4, and then change the white value to about 0.6. Yeah, that should work pretty well. And then I'm just going to up the details so there's a little bit of transition between the two. Let's try about 8. Yeah, I think that'll work okay. Maybe 4 actually. We don't want it to be too noisy at the borders. And then we'll feed this color value into the factor, if I can get the click right, and then just click on the principled shader, or sort of Control Shift left click. There we go. Now we need to play around with the noise a little bit, but if I just select these two for a second and mute them, you can instantly see the difference. Really obvious tiling, not so obvious tiling, all with a relatively simple noise pattern. Now the more effort you put into making that noise pattern perfect to fit your camera angle and scene, the better the result will be. It can take a little bit of time sometimes, but overall the method works really well. So let's try 0.2. No, it's going to be too obvious, maybe 0.4. Yeah. Yeah, I think that works pretty well. Good. So we've detailed that texture, at least as far as the camera angle is concerned. And that's another important point. If you try and look at it from a overhead view and get rid of every single trace of tiling, regardless of if the camera is even going to be looking at it, you're not going to have much luck, because there's still always going to be some, using this method anyway, there's always going to be some tiling at some scale. So always try and do it just from your camera angle. As long as it looks good in your shot, that's all that matters. Good. So we've done our first material. So what I'm going to do is put in a frame, like so, and drop all of that in there, and we'll call this, press N so I can edit the properties, and call it forest floor. And I'm just going to up the size of the text so we can see what that does. Now, I've mentioned we'll be looking at displacement, so I'm going to quickly add that now. What we're going to need to do is, first of all, add in a displacement like so, feed our displacement output into the height, and then connect that up to there like that. Now I'm just going to jump to solid mode for a second because this can cause problems. Now we need to enable adaptive subdivision for micro displacement, so I'm just going to go to experimental, jump over to the material mode, make sure that our settings are set to displacement and bump, jump over to our modifier panel, add in a subdivision surface. We've got an adaptive in there already. I'm just going to raise that value a little so we avoid any crashes or other issues, hopefully. And then turn back on the rendered mode. And this should look hideous, yes, because our displacement strength is way too strong. Now what you could do is just adjust this scale value, but then that's going to adjust the scale value for any material that you add to this. In a minute we're going to blend in a second material, and they may have differing displacement values. So instead I want to add the displacement this side of things, okay? So to do that, I'm going to add in a math node, set it to multiply, zoom in a bit here so we can see what we're doing, grab that and place it just after the displacement texture. And then what I'll do is Shift D and grab that. So we've now got two copies, both after the displacement texture. And then just so we can keep these values the same, I'm going to add in an input value, call it displacement, like so, and then I can feed that into these two multiply nodes, and now whatever I set that to will be the strength for the displacement for this part of the material. Now I think a value of about 0.1 should work fairly nicely. Maybe 0.15, it's hard to tell in preview mode because the resolution is so low. We'll stick with that for now. If we need to change it then we can. Okay, so the next step is to jump over to our rocky moss and do exactly the same again, but to save time I'm going to pause the recording and just duplicate all these steps to create another material that's been detailed based off this texture. Okay, so now we have a rocky moss material that's been detailed in exactly the same method as before. A few minor differences to settings in terms of the scale and the displacement strength to suit this material, but other than that it's identical to the first one. And on this one it's actually even easier to see the detailing effect. If I double click on, or if I select both of these and mute them, that's our very obviously tiled mossy texture, and that's with the detailing. Makes a huge difference. Okay, so now I'm going to use the mixing shader to combine these two materials to give us our finished sort of ground material. So that's much the same as we've been doing already. Bring in another mix shader, connect up the outputs to where they need to go, like so, and then we're just going to feed in the two different materials into the various inputs. I think I'll jump ahead here so you're not watching me connect them all up. Okay, And with that done, if we adjust this factor value now, we should jump from this forest floor to the grassy material. Good. And then in much the same way, we can now use a noise texture to blend the two together. Now at this point you might be wondering, why aren't we just using a mix shader and combining the various shaders together to save having to use this Poliigon specular mixer that I've put together? Now the main reason is due to displacement, because we want to take the displacement with us at each stage of this, which we have been doing, and mixing it in the exact same way that we're mixing the other elements of the material. And if you go down the route of just using a normal mix shader with multiple principled shaders, you're going to have to double up on everything you do to keep the displacement in check, to make sure the displacement is being mixed in the same way as everything else, and it gets surprisingly complicated. Another benefit is you're only using the one principled shader, which will improve performance, and it means that these final textures, the final color, specular, roughness, normal and displacement, you could use this for baking, or for whatever purposes you might want to. You've got finished textures at the end being fed into the principled shader. So even though it's a little bit less tidy in terms of the nodes, it is a better way of doing it. Okay, so now what I'm going to bring in is a noise texture again. I'm just going to press Control T to bring in a mapping node and a texture coordinate. In fact, we don't need the mapping node, but I just wanted to set that to object again. And then Control Shift and left click, and we get our noise texture. Let's have a look at that. And what I'm going to do is actually feed that directly into our Poliigon shader and then reconnect. So now we can start to see the effect we're having in a more sort of live sort of way. And I'm going to hit Shift A and add in a color ramp, which will give us more control. So as I start moving these around, you'll see as I bring up this black value, we're losing some of the moss. If I drag up the white value, we bring the moss up. And the closer these are together, the sharper the transition between the two will be. One thing I will do is raise this detail value all the way up so we get some sort of nice transition effects where we want them. And I'm going to adjust the scaling a little bit as well. And I think for the purposes of a tutorial that will do nicely. Okay, let's just do a final render, make sure everything's working and looking the way it should be. I'm going to turn off rendered mode, turn down the dicing rate to increase the amount of subdivision, and we'll just give that a render. And there we go. Not looking too bad. I'd certainly go a little bit further with the displacement, I think, and possibly adjust the noise texture a bit to just change the way that the two materials are mixed together. But yeah, I think that's working pretty well. So in summary, we've used a custom mixing shader to take a Poliigon material, eliminate the tiling effect from it, and then combine it with another material to make a final ground scene.